Welcome to Campaigns and Conquests. My name is Magenta. I'll be your co host today. And joining us also is your host, Storm. Say hi, Storm.
Hi, Storm. How's everybody doing today?
I'm
How's
doing well. I hope all of our viewers are also doing well.
hmm
So I hear we have some exciting topics today.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at some uh, cons- trying to conceptualize how mechanics work. In that, conceptualize what are they trying to portray to you? What is the picture they're drawing in your mind or your imagination? And are they doing it right? Um, Kind of gets into abstraction versus simulation. We're also going to take a look at some Tony Bath war game history. It's a kind of a precursor history to uh, the development of RPGs, uh, known, through the D&D and the Blackmore's campaign. So a little bit of history there. Um, Going to talk about some of the fine folks that have been helping out campaigns and conquest, and put out a little bit of a plea to everybody else to follow suit. So one of our fans have put a request for us to converse with another YouTuber. We're going to try to do that, and in the interim, we're going to talk a little bit about some of that YouTuber's takes on campaign creation and uh, the same kind of perceiving as of rules mechanics. Sorry, a little something caught my throat.
That's
Anyways,
right. We didn't even notice.
catching my breath. So first, Magenta, how would you rate yourself as a player? Noob? Do you like that terminology, or do you find that
Noob is just, I don't know. I don't like the
unsavory?
way it sounds as a word, if you know what I mean. You know how some words just strike you the like moist, people hate that word.
I hate that word.
I find the word noob sounds stupid. So I don't like it, but I would say I'm on the newer side of wargaming, so I would probably put myself at like a junior high school level.
That's why we're going to show you part of this video and get kind of a fresh perspective on it, untainted by years worth of heavy debate and jargon words and all that, and see how you would answer these questions. And then we'd like our friends and fans here to give your response in the replies below. We like to kind of contrast and compare. If you're a old enough to remember, I guess it's still going on, Family Feud, that's pretty much what we're looking for. Several answers on the board, see which one is the most popular, kind of discuss it a little bit. We're going to pick it up next week and talk about the replies that we get from viewers as well. But we're going to have you look at a portion of a video that I made and get your response to the question posited within it. And again, you at home, please formulate your response and put it in the text below, reply section. Here we go. So let's talk about rolling to hit and then rolling for damage. Just and visualizing what's being represented by the die rolls and the mechanics and the abstractions. You know. Okay, so you roll to hit and you significantly. I'm not going to get into a specific. I understand that the quickest and most common response would be, well, it depends on the system. I get it, but let's just you roll to hit and you beat the score needed to hit significantly. Just put it that way. Okay. No double damage or any of that stuff, but you beat it by a lot. And then you roll for damage and you roll on the low end of the spectrum of damage, potential damage um, that you can inflict on the hit. And so I say, what happened? If you had to explain in detail, without the abstraction, just as a thought exercise, not as part of a game or a rule, just a thought exercise, what just happened? What just happened? That
Well,
is the question.
so good question. I don't know exactly what would have happened, but say I guess it depends on the roll and how far ahead you were. Like, if you rolled the maximum amount available for the dice, I would say you probably killed the opponent.
Right.
Be my
Well,
assessment. But
sure.
if you just barely hit, then maybe you just mildly, lightly injured him. I That would be off the top of my head. What I
Okay. But your hit roll was superb. You rolled really good for the hit, but really bad for the damage.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was just one roll. I messed that up. Sorry about that. Well, yeah, if you roll really badly for the damage, then you probably just, you know, gave him a paper cut or the equivalent, or knocked him down on his butt and he gets right back up and maybe he's a little weaker, but not significantly impaired.
Okay, but here's the part. So you got part A is you hit really well. Not just you didn't just make the mark. You significantly beat it. So it was an exceptional hit. Very accurate. Or is it? What is if I got to, just for example, it takes 10. I hit on a 10 or better on a 20 sider and I roll 19. Okay, that's a hit. I've rolled a lot more than 10. What if I roll 11? Is it just a hit? Is that how you see that two hit? Is just I've made contact, or was it a better hit at 19 than it was at 11?
Well, I suppose if you have a separate damage roll, it depends on the damage roll. But if you didn't have a damage roll, I guess that's where I got confused because it would seem to me that it should make a difference. If you hit at the maximum available hit, it should make a difference.
Okay. Um, so so let's just put it to you this way: when you hear the words "to hit," what do you think you're trying to achieve? Does that invoke what?
I think you're
Accuracy,
trying to hit your target.
right? So accuracy,
Usually, right, yeah. You're
right?
not aiming to miss. You're aiming to get him in the forehead or in the chest shot or
Right,
whatever is the
right,
best.
right. A swing of a sword or an axe or a hammer or something like that. I think a lot of people don't really factor in the idea that that would be like an accurate, have anything to do with accuracy, for a couple of reasons. First of all, most games would probably put that. And again, there's people out there that can always go, well, not this game. Yes, there's exceptions to every rule, and perhaps more than one. But generally, you see a swing of a sword or a bat or something like that as a function of a strength, whereas um, shooting an arrow or throwing a dart or something like that is a function of dexterity. But um, if you're swinging a bat and you're not, just taking baseball as a discussion analogy here, if you're swinging a bat and you're not making contact with that ball, it's not because you're a weakling. My dad was pretty strong when he was 40 years old. But he didn't. I'd pitch to him and he'd miss the ball a lot too because he didn't have the greatest dexterity, the greatest hand-eye coordination to make connection with that ball. So and there is some hand-eye coordination, there is some dexterity, there is some accuracy that comes with swinging a sword and not only hitting somebody that may seem easy if you're standing right next to them, but hitting in the right spot, especially if they're wearing armor, that's something different. Now, most people go, this is all the details that we try to abstract out. We don't want to, this is getting down into the weeds. This makes games fiddly. We don't want to think about that. It makes our head hurt. We just want to, roll for damage and get an approximation, which is fine. But even in an approximation, my argument is that sometimes it's not telling a story properly because it's actually leaving too many details out. If you have Cliff Notes takes down the amount of words you have to read in order to get the gist of the story. But if you Cliff Noted the Cliff Notes, at some point you're going to strip out so much information that you're no longer going to be able to yield anything, from it. Does that make sense? Is that a good analogy? I'm
Yeah.
not good at analogies. So
Yeah, if you do a copy of a copy of a copy, and
right.
each one getting more simplistic, eventually you just have a few dots on the page, and it's you have to connect them yourself. But
Right.
then there's also too, in some cases, some things just can't be cliff noted at all. Some things like I would say that Shakespeare is not really Shakespeare without the language.
Mm-hmm. Right. It
So
loses.
if you
Yeah.
know, yeah, if you cliff note Shakespeare, you really lose a lot
Right.
versus some other things that could be cliff noted easily without as much impact.
Right. You can strip out the personality, the spice, the interest in it. There's a
Right.
game. There's a war game called Battle, made by Charles Grant, and everybody, a lot of people said, "Hey, that's great. It's real simplistic. It's a great way to start." And maybe it is a great way to start, but um, there's no differences between the combatants, and so it becomes kind of generic. Some of the attractive elements of fighting war games and fielding armies is the idiosyncrasies or the special circumstances or just personality uh, of the uh, forces involved. The like a trope in a lot of old war movies was the swaggery, rebellious American versus the that was typically all sweaty in his uniform. Was he was the Second World War? Not really looking that great. Got the beard, looking to go drink a beer after the battle. And then there's the British. Whether it's accurate or not isn't the point. But then there was the British who were very well groomed, very by the book, and
Formal,
yeah, hmm
very formal.
right. And that was that's just the different personalities that you know and sometimes that's attractive to people to have that. And if you strip that out, it becomes boring. It's just now it's just red versus blue or black versus white. Same thing with some of these mechanics and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I was getting to by making the movie. Or the video, I should say, goes on and gets into my own perceptions and stuff like that. So I'll spare it as it's almost 7 minutes, but I'll put a link in the description. I encourage everybody to go check it out as I do everything that I make, because why else would I make it if I didn't want you to look at it? So give you something to think about, something interesting. But I wanted to have a newer player's perspective on it, in that in some cases, when you say, well, a low damage roll just indicates that you didn't have a very good hit. Well, that's a function of accuracy as much as anything else. Sure, people can say, well, it's a function of strength. If you don't hit them that hard, then you don't do that much damage. Well, okay. Uh, so you have this constant battle between people that don't want to think about those details and people like me that do. It doesn't necessarily mean I want to put it in the game, but I'm trying to visualize what's going on, especially if you have to play what they call theater of the mind, which a lot of RPG people like to do. They don't like there's a section of people that don't like miniatures, don't like maps, or laying out a battle. Well, if I've got to think about it in my head, then I need to know. To me, rolling to hit, rolling to damage, these mechanics tell a story. They provide a narrative. The fighter swung his sword at the enemy, and it was if you rolled high, uh, you did a lot of damage. Some people talk about hit points as being this abstract way of explaining that you're receiving a lot of wounds. Some RPGs, uh, Warhammer Fantasy, I believe, is one where it it expressly states what's happened to you physically. Like, so I've never played that game, but somebody that was talking about this with me on Twitter says you can like lose a finger or an arm or something like that. Okay, I can visualize that. I can see what's going on versus this very vague uh, idea that, well, I've lost 10 hit points, which is 10% of my total, so that means I'm really bloody and battered. How and where and why? And are you cut? Are you bruised? You know, it would be different. If you're hit by a hammer, you'd be bruised. If you're cut by a sword, you'd be bleeding. But
And
it
if you're
just
bleeding, you're going to get weak real fast and maybe have to put a bandage on before you can continue to fight, which is
right.
different than if you're just bruised.
Pardon me
Or if
for
you
hitting
have a
my
broken bone, that's going to be different still. You might not be able to stand up, you know.
right. And so you get people that go, well, that's all too fiddly, too much detail. That's too simulationist. We need to just abstract, and you get this uh, hit point system that abstracts that. But it, and people who are designers say it's finding that middle ground, that sweet spot. And a lot of people that talk about rules and consumers say the same thing. Um,
But I'm sorry, I have a question about that, and this may just be because I'm a new player, but wouldn't there be room for all three? Like I could see a certain point, like say you're playing a game with like let's take the Battle for Middle Earth, right? The big scene in the movie where you've got the Rohirrim coming down on defending Helm's Deep against the orc horde or whatever, and you've got all of that. That would be a time where you might need to abstract, because how else you're not going to be able to account for every orc with a lost limb, or everybody who got an arrow in the eye or whatever. It would be too hard to abstract that. To do the simulation of that, you'd have to abstract it. But then again, if you've got a close in fight with a swashbuckling kind of Errol Flynn, if anyone even knows who Errol Flynn is anymore, but a one-on-one sword battle between, like in The Witcher, that's more current, more people would know. That would be one where you definitely could do a more of a simulation where yeah, I mean, it wasn't just that he dominated and killed his opponent, it was how he killed it was one of the things in the show that made that kind of interesting to watch, that um, the moves that he would make and the damage that it did was, unique to him in his special set of skills. So I could see room for both. And if you just try to always middle ground it, don't you kind of lose something on both sides? Like
yeah, I think so.
where you
I
get
agree.
where it's just lukewarm instead of really portraying either one. And I could see roles depending on the circumstance where one would be preferred in this circumstance and the other would be preferred in a different circumstance.
Right. I agree. To me, rolling twice to get one, the answer, the question you're asking with rolling two hit and damage is, I attack this guy or gal or it or monster or whatever. What's the end result? Is it dead now? Is it wounded? Did I do something to it? Did I whiff whatever? Why break that up into, for people that are often complaining about too much procedure, too much fiddliness, too much time taken to answer these questions, why are we breaking it down into two rolls? Why not roll the whole thing up into one action? Where if I roll poorly, typically low, then there's nothing happening. I've missed, or if I or done the grazing thing if I roll just a little better than low, or if I roll super high, then he's dead. Have the spectrum of miss to complete destruction be one spectrum, one roll instead of two. It speeds things up. And as far as like you say, a theatrical thing, role playing is more theatrical than wargaming. I would suspect most people believe that. So why make it this clinical discussion of points removed and damage inflicted with these numerical processes instead of something that's interesting and fun when you watch a battle like you mentioned on The Witcher or whatever. I'm old too, so D'Artagnan in in Oliver Reed. There's a 50-year-old troll, but whatever scene you want, Zorro puts the Z on the villains because he's so skilled with his little flail or whatever they call those sabers that they used. He puts the Z in the cheek of the guy or whatever like that. Or if you're watching Conan, he might be lopping the guy's whole arm off because he's this big Brutus barbarian with a giant sword or something like that. You have some sort of real world description of what occurs. And if you're role
I
playing,
think that's, yeah, and particularly I see that as kind of the magic of having a dungeon master, a game master in the first place. The
right,
role of that is to immerse you in the story, to make you feel like you're participating in something unique, and that you're not that you're really there. I mean, nobody ever is fooled that to that degree, and you don't want to confuse reality and fantasy, but to give you the flavor of being in, rather than just okay, you hit for 10 points, so you that was a good hit. Okay, well, yeah, that's kind of all right, great. How many
right,
times can you hear that in a story because before it's kind of like, okay, moving along now.
right,
What else you got?
right. And I've always, and some people go, it's kind of weird. Some people don't enjoy watching movies with me because I have this tendency to go, well, it wouldn't happen that way. When I saw like Die Hard, if people are familiar with it, probably the greatest action film of the 1980s. Most people, certainly in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion.
Was it
But
80s or was it 90s?
it was Die Hard was in the 80s, yeah. And
Oh,
and he the if you haven't seen it, the star, the hero, is running barefoot over glass. He's cut all over his body, and like Magenta pointed out, blood loss starts to make you weak. And uh, or just any fight, having unfortunately been in some fights over my years, the whole, watching guys just pound each other, hit each other with chairs and get back. It doesn't work like that. The 10 minutes, and I understand they're Hollywood's, trying to go for epic and so forth. So it's not that
well,
it's not
and
energy.
heroism too. I mean,
Right.
everybody wants to be a mythological hero, stronger than real life. I mean, I think that's the point of fantasy to some degree, is that, Superman, if you're playing that kind of a role, you can fly. That's what's cool about it.
Sure.
You're impervious to bullets.
Right.
Although this is why Spider-Man's my favorite superhero, because he's
Right.
not really impervious. He's got
Right.
some skills, but he can
Right.
be hurt, and he still goes out there and fights anyway. And to me, that's more heroic. But I digress. Sorry.
Right. I've had that. I've had people because I've talked about this with people, and he goes, "But you don't understand. I want to be like I would mock like Hawkeye in Endgame. Hitting these aliens that are on these eh, jet jet skis in the air that are doing 300, 400 miles an hour, and he's knocking 3 arrows at a time and hitting them, and they go, but you don't understand. He's a superhero. He can do more than the
That's
average
the point.
human stuff like
Right.
I
That's
want to
the
play that. I want to be that exceptional. So okay, but here's the thing. That's fine. Preference is great, and you have different mechanics that handle something like that. But if you don't take Superman, if I go play a game where I'm Superman and I'm taking down just a bunch of regular bank robbers with some pistols.
There's no
Where's
challenge.
where's the game? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Superman's always gonna win because
I'm here, I
no
win.
one can touch him.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So you had to bring in kryptonite. You had to bring in Lex Luthor that had, that could research and figure that out and all that sort of stuff. And put if there's no risk, there's no reward. There's no fun. So uh, even if you're
There's also no heroism, I would say.
right,
Well, I mean, there is dedication to values, I would say.
sure,
Superman definitely has that. I don't want to diss Superman. I know there's a lot of
yeah, there'll
Superman
be
fans out
fans.
there,
Will be
including myself, but
right,
as a game model, you're right. You couldn't play a game where you were Superman because if you did, you would
right,
just waltz right through and nothing would touch you and you would just smack everything down that got in your way and it would get boring really fast.
right.
The threat of death or injury, the threat of failing, the threat of not accomplishing your goals, that's part of what makes the game a challenge. And if it doesn't have that, you're not like if you know you're going to win before you start, you, it doesn't feel like a win.
It's just, well, I rolled with my right hook attack, and I got 2 points of damage, and no wonder people hate combat and talk about these games being too slow and too tedious because you're literally sitting there with a character sheet and a pencil counting backwards or forwards. Oh, I got healed by the cleric for 2 extra. I've played D&D, enough of it, and I enjoy the game, but the combat is it's just it's counting up and down. You have a pool of points, and it goes down, you're dead, and if it goes up, it's no fun. So I
And
like
it
the idea.
doesn't have to be right. I mean, you don't have to say things in terms of you just lost 5 hit points or whatever. You could describe it in a different way and make
Well,
it
that's
more of a narrative kind
yeah.
of thing.
Well, there's people do that. They go, well, a good DM will mask that by, but you know what happens is I'm kind of going down a path I didn't intend, but just real quick, what happens is most people don't maintain that immersion for a variety of reasons. So and even if you do, you're still, excuse me, sitting there with a mechanic where you have a sheet of paper with a record and keeping records where and to be fair, what I proposing, you'd still have to write down, hey, I have a broken nose or something like that. But it makes it more interesting if if real world effects, instead of having to learn math, instead of having to remember some sort of mechanics jargon, I broke my nose or I broke my leg. And in games where people are talking about a lot of, you'll hear a term, I don't know if you've heard it yet, but there's a lot of people that complain about something called a murder hobo. And a murder hobo is that whenever they're confronted by an enemy, they just attack it physically without any thought about trying to do something else. I'm not always sure that the criticism, sometimes I look and go, well, why would, yeah, and what's the problem with that? But some people really get irritated with it. So if there's a lasting effect, if walking away from a fight as you do in reality leaves you going, you're not going, you may win, but you're not going to be unscathed, and that might affect you for the rest of the game or at least a long period of time. It'll make you think a little longer about just jumping into a physical confrontation all the time. and so it solves your murder hobo problem as well. Without some of these abstractions end up having to make you come up with more mechanics to deal with it. If you don't want murder hobos, but you don't want to do something like what I'm talking about, then you've got to do it. People will spend hours discussing how to create mechanics or create adventures that steer players in directions they want them to go to avoid being murder hobos. And they'll do this concurrently with talking about how they want to maintain what they call player agency, which is the ability to make any decision you want. So if you have full player agency and your player just wants to just draw a sword and go after everything, but you don't like that because it's murder hoboing, so then you come up with some rules to try to defeat that. Now you've also defeated the player agency that you say is, the golden chalice of gaming. You can't, so you just end up
But
sometimes
couldn't
making.
you? Oh,
Hmm?
and I'm sorry. I was just thinking of another way that that could be handled as well. I mean, besides having the like inevitable risk, like if you're going to go after someone and in the battle, when they attack back, you could end up losing an arm or a limb or something significantly bad could happen to you more likely than maybe um just getting off scot free and walking away with their loot, which really, I don't know if murder hobo is the term I'd use. It kind of sounds like, just a thug, someone who just goes in just robbing people. Like, what did they used to call them back in the day? Highwaymen, you're just
Yeah,
running around killing to steal people's stuff,
right. Hmm.
um, you're just a bad guy at that point. But which, I mean, that's allowed in D&D. You don't have to play the good guy, right?
Right, but some of the people who say, now we've wandered off the original topic, which is fine. That's part of the
Sorry.
conversation. She says, that's all right. No, don't be mad. It's not your fault. It's
I
just
have
that's
a
part of it.
tendency to
But
do
no,
that.
no, no, it's okay. It's okay. But but yeah, what people say is, uh, I'm supposed to kill this stuff. It's bad stuff. I'm in a dungeon filled with evil monsters, and I'm a good person. I'm good. I want to save people from the evil by destroying the evil. So of course I'm going to go attack it. You're not robbing other people. You're killing bad monsters that happen to have somehow accumulated a lot of treasure. So
Well,
that's some people
that's
go. That's some people say, why are you calling me? What's this murder hobo stuff? The stuff is there for me to kill. And well, we like to have people think of other ways to solve problems. Okay, well then put a trap in front of them, put a riddle in front of them, make them have to solve a mystery. But if you're going to put a hostile and physically aggressive monster in front of them, why are you getting mad if they just, they're carrying a weapon for a reason and that's it? Why are you getting mad at them for going, okay, I'm going to attack that stuff? So sometimes the murder hobo criticism just doesn't make conceptual sense to me. But some people say, I just don't want a game where all it is just thoughtless slaughter of things. To me, that's a decision made by whoever created the module and or campaign. If you don't have other elements other than walking through places to kill things, why are you mad that that's what they're doing? But if you think that you don't want your people to just immediately go to let's attack them, that's why I say then make that a decision that they'll have to mull over by either it may be the end of you, or even if it isn't, even if it's somebody that you can defeat, that doesn't mean it isn't going to be something permanent.
like
Permanent.
maybe that was the one orc who had decided that he wasn't going to be he wasn't down with what the other orcs were doing, and he was going to be delivering you key information that could help you in the rest of your mission, but you killed him. No, you don't get that.
Well, yeah,
I do,
things like that. But
yeah.
right. But
I
my
mean,
point
I
is
can
with a
see that, but that gets into a kind of a depth of storytelling more so than a game mechanics. So I can see where we're kind of
well,
veering off the original topic.
yeah,
But
right. My point was just basically this again that okay, I'm going to go into that fight and I'm going to win, but I might lose a finger or get my eye poked out. So I might think about doing something else. So anyway, that was kind of the idea. But the original intent was is if two roles to answer one question seems like too much procedure, and why not make it one? So uh, why not just
That
say,
does seem more simplistic. You could set it up that way to where, that one die does it all, and you don't have to, because if you are playing, and I've been through some experiences where you're getting into a fight and there's it's not to the level of, like, Helm's Deep level, but it's still like you're fighting against 20 opponents, and that's a lot of rolling, if you have to roll twice for every single outcome. That becomes quite a time intensive, if nothing else, exercise.
mhm, mhm. So that's
Especially if you've got, oh, sorry, but especially if you've got a situation where, you don't necessarily kill them. Like if your damage roll is only that you do a quarter of the damage that you need to take them out, well, then you're going to have to attack that one again, and then you end up having to roll multiple times just to take out one enemy, which can happen in either way, but having to roll, twice each time. You could end up having to roll 8 times just to take out one character
mhm,
or more.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. It you may not like you may want to fast forward through detail, but you should really, and this is the 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 bottom line, and we're going to talk about a little more with some of the stuff we're going to move into after this. But the bottom line is try to conceptualize what the mechanics are telling you as a story. And if it doesn't make sense, maybe there's a problem there. And saying, well, okay, you've hit, but now you're rolling damage, and if the damage is low, that means your accuracy wasn't great. You're contradicting the first part of the procedure. If I that was what the scenario was supposed to display that I put on video. I've not only beat the score I need to hit, I beat it significantly, which should tell me. I mean, you could say, well, it's binary. It's either a hit or miss. Okay, fine, but then you're telling me that a portion, the next section, is further affecting my hit or my accuracy. Well, you just nicked him. It was just a glancing blow. Okay, well, that's accuracy as much as anything else. So if you're saying I either hit or miss, the next question you're saying is you kind of don't. It's a little bit more complicated that you can really hit them hard, or you might just glance or nick them. So you're kind of contradicting yourself with these two ways of doing things. And so why have that contradiction? Because when people try to conceptualize it, all of a sudden, sometimes it doesn't make sense. So that's kind of what I was trying to say in that video. Obviously, not that well because I showed you and we went off into all sorts of. So
Well, no, we went off into all sorts of other areas because I have ADHD. So that's the other thing.
okay, well,
That's my fault entirely. I'm always going to take us in different directions. Sorry.
ever since the late '80s, I started hearing people start using the word. People probably used it earlier, and I just didn't hear it. But the whole design for effect, and in my mind, melding the two roles into one is a design for effect attempt to just say, okay, let's get past all, and just say, here's what happened. Either low roll, you missed and or did a insignificant amount of damage. High roll, you know, you swatted them like a fly, and be done with it and move on. And whether it's a mano a mano, or like you were saying, in a battle where you don't need to know about the broken knee of the guy in the fifth row. It's a unit. You just need to casualties. It just speeds things up if you just incorporate one role. So that's what I was thinking on the deal. So uh,
It
the
makes
net.
sense to me. I mean,
Mhm.
that it sounds like if you were a game master or dungeon master, it would be an easier thing to do because you could just look at the first die roll and go, okay, you rolled a 20, the guy's dead.
Right, right. Now Magenta?
I think I like it. Because myself, and I know this is maybe, I don't know, when I play a game like that, I think I really just want to be able to do. I want to be able to get into the experience of being the character. That's my goal. And facing the challenges that the character would face, and those challenges don't really include looking up rules in a book. I mean, generally, if I really were an elf in the forest trying to take down an orc or a whatever, whatever challenge I faced in there, I would not be consulting a rule book in order to knock my arrow and fire. I would be saying, I'm going to knock an arrow and fire at that enemy over there. And then having a understanding of the rules in the background before you start playing is useful, to know what you're capable of. Like, I wouldn't try and take out a dragon with an arrow. So
Hmm.
having just kind of a fundamental understanding of the world and what your capabilities within it would be,
Hmm.
that could be where the rules come in. But I don't want to have to consult the rule book every turn. Does that make sense?
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So, and it makes it one of the things as I've said before, and I know I repeat it a lot, but I hate all the invocations of the word complexity, the simulationist versus abstraction. I understand them. I get why people use them, um, but they kind of make me cringe. They tend to run people off. Is the thing, and uh, finding players is hard. If you're one of these people that when I say that, I go, I don't know. I've been playing for years, and I've got this group, and I've got people who follow me that regularly show pictures of them playing with a group of individuals. And that's awesome. You're so Sometimes I don't know if people realize how lucky they are to have 5 to 6 people, or maybe sometimes even more, that are willing, able, both in the time that they have throughout their busy schedule, or logistically able in that they're close to you, to come to your house, sit down, or wherever you're doing this, and meet face to face to play. It's a rarity, you know. It just doesn't happen that often. So, so finding players becomes a real difficult prospect. And when new players or potential new players come around and start saying, well, this stuff looks kind of neat and interesting, but I'd like to learn more about it. I don't know anything. I'm kind of, and they hear, well, these games, it's 2 hours to play 2 minutes of combat. They're highly complicated, and you hear fiddly and clunky and all these words that describe how tedious a chore it is to learn how to play, and to play because you have to keep overcoming this tedious. These words get used so often. A newcomer will come around and hear all that and go, it sounds like this really sucks. I can't really understand why people are playing it, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend 3 hours to play 2 turns of a game and never finish it. So,
I'll admit I was intimidated out of. I mean, Storm had to talk me into playing to some extent, to give it a try in some of the games. Others I was more interested in. Like, the first time I ever heard about D&D was when it first came out, when it became popularized, and I think that's probably, if we're going to look at what the revolutionary aspect of the creators of D&D, what they did that really made it is they did make it a product, which meant that it got advertised, it got spread around, people started to learn about it, get curiosity about it. But I'm sure there are quite a lot of people who were like me, who bought the books, who bought the content, and anxious to find someone to play with, and just due to their circumstances. Like in my case, I lived in a very rural area in the country, and it was very religious area too. And then you had that whole satanic panic thing, and your Dungeons and Dragons is going to make your kids evil, all of that kind of crazy stuff. And of course, has nothing to do with any of that. But that was the rumor going around, and it just meant that I couldn't find anyone to ever play
Right.
with it. And it's not a single player game. You know, you really do have to have a group of people willing to play, and at least one person willing to be the dungeon master or game master, or it just doesn't really, doesn't work. So I never really got a chance to play. And then later on, it's true. I have seen, people getting into like flame wars over the details of how to play these games. And if you're a new player, you're kind of like, well, how am I supposed to navigate this? Which side do I come down on? If I take a point of view on something, is it going to mean that I can't play with this group or that group, or which way is better? It's too confusing. I give up.
Well,
You know,
that's yeah, yeah, right. Social media and stuff like that hasn't really done it any favors. But and there, I can't solve those problems. But advocating for people to try playing on this free Kriegspiel type of stuff, it at least eliminates the, oh my God, that's a big book. And I have to remember all that stuff. I have to learn all that stuff. That looks like a school textbook. And that chases them away, especially when on top of it, they hear people saying, oh, yeah, it's some of the so hard and tedious and all these words that they invoke. And they see that stuff on the internet, like you say, or they see, or as you talk about,
that's
they
what
see
I've
people
seen.
arguing, yeah, arguing about it, and they even go, well. So all of that chases them away. But if you can, and people use the term approachable, I want approachable game so I can get more players. Well, approachable would be, look, you don't have to read a textbook. This isn't a college course. Sit down, just like we did with Magenta. You know, we started playing Star Wars, West End Games, which is an excellent system. Most people say it's one of the best. It's it's still around. People are remaking it, and which is anyway. But yet, there's a lot of material. There's a lot of books that come with it. It was, and she goes, I don't know, I don't want to really have to go through all that. Just start playing. We'll teach you as you go. And if there's no rules to learn, there's no manuals or all that. Just sit down and put yourself in the role that you want to take. A rebel, subversive in an
Of
imperial
course, I'm a red.
galaxy. Sure.
Of
And
course.
and just what would you do if your character was you? You are your character. What are you going to do in the situation? Tell us, and we'll handle the rest. And more people might be willing to go. Yeah, at least I'll give it a shot. Uh,
You know what I've discovered through playing that Star Wars, and this is just an aside. I know I'm getting us off topic again, but I hope you'll forgive me for this. But I just want to say you kind of fall in love with your character if you're playing the game right, and you're playing it through adventures and close calls and all kinds of other stuff, and if you're getting into some scrapes and some victories and things like that, and your character starts to develop a personality of their own as you play too, like in response to the things that happen in the game. And it becomes kind of like, I mean, it's not like an imaginary friend exactly, because you're not pretending they're sitting and having a cup of tea with you, but it kind of becomes like that. It's like a I don't know, like a imaginary kind of persona that you can take on, and I I hope I'm making sense to anybody who's played Dungeons and Dragons, but you do develop a fondness and affinity for your characters. I guess what I'm trying to say. That makes it more than just um, like when you're playing Monopoly and you get to be the shoe, or you get to be the the car or whatever. Those are just tokens. These are a little bit more in depth than just a token that you're playing the game with.
hmm. um, so we did say at the beginning, we'll just want to maybe move on to the next segment. But yeah, I agree with you. I know what you're saying. I mean, I had uh, people like Rob Coons join my Discord, uh, perhaps to play Greyhawk at some point, and it's still Robilar. That was his character in 1973 or whatever, and it's going to be his character today. So he signed in with that screen name. So that you remain attached to a character that long, 50 years. So I
Right.
know other people agree with that attitude. But moving on, I guess, but uh, we wanted to again thank uh, a couple of people. They're not the only ones, but we just want to feature a couple of people every episode for helping us out. And this week, Michael, and that's all I know. You know, it's the internet. Some people, uh, but he's been very helpful. And he, as we said earlier, talked to us about maybe having a conversation with another YouTuber called Bandits Keep, who has some interesting things. We just want to talk about that maybe real quick after this. Another guy I want to give I should say guy. I don't know to be sure. Pretty sure guy. So don't get mad. I'm not trying to purposely misgender you. You have the individual's handle or screen name is probable spam. Which, so I don't know if it's if they're a female or a male or what they
Sam's
wherever
been calling me.
wherever they want to
I've been
go.
getting calls from them.
Right, yeah. He's
all the time.
we appreciate your time and effort because we know your U.S. probable spam is very busy, always showing up on our phones. Yeah, right. But fella came. So when I would go live, this individual, I keep saying fella. I don't know why I default to male. Don't call me names. It's just I don't mean anything by it. But this
Force and
individual,
habit. That's okay.
right? This individual would come on screen, say hi, start talking, and then go to every because I'll live stream to like 5 or 6 different platforms and would just go to every one of them to help me out, give me a little screen time and stuff like that. Hit the like button. Um,
Very nice. Thank you, probable spam.
Thank you for that, and have a little conversation when he has time for it, and or he or she. And thanks so much. And Michael's been great in that. Done similar things. Is putting out tweets saying, "Hey guys, come and check this out. This fella's talking. I'm a fella. I'll go with that." And talking about and Magenta from time to time with us here on Mondays, talking about this stuff, just down to earth. He really composed a neat tweet and then is encouraging other people to communicate, trying to build a little bit of community. So, Bandits Keep is the name. You can check him out, and that is a he, and you can check it out. His name is Daniel, according to his introduction. Check him out on YouTube. Um, and he also was talking about what we were talking about, kind of trying to conceive what's being displayed in a mechanic. In his case, he was talking about a hex. So, what's inside a hex? How are you with the maps, Magenta?
Oh well, yeah. So I'm actually kind of okay with the maps, but sometimes I struggle a little bit with some of the like symbols on there to know like when symbols are used instead of like you know a pictorial kind of depiction. I have a little trouble deciphering those, but otherwise I'm okay with them.
Well, okay. And he was discussing that. What is really inside? What does that symbol really mean? If 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 it says forest, does that really mean that the entirety of the space that hex represents is nothing but solid forest? And the answer is, I mean, as always, you people could go, well, that depends, and that's accurate enough. But generally, what you'll see, and hex crawls and hex maps used in RPG are just direct translations from war games. As I say, the two are very similar. Uh, they'll typically say, they being the rules or some portion of the terrain key will say this represents the dominant terrain within the hex, not necessarily the exclusive terrain, but the dominant. terrain. Um, and that usually comes if the hex represents a significant amount of space, meaning that they're big, the scale is big. If the scale is a lot smaller, then yeah, that very well, like it may mean that that entire hex is woods. So he's talking about trying to conceive how to maneuver around with hexes. And the next question he had was, okay, so you've got a little line for a border of a hex. When you cross that border, do you immediately move into the next type of terrain, or is it more gradual? And obviously, in real life, it's more gradual. Um, it's another example. This is kind of the theme I was trying to generate for this conversation in general, was that everybody wants a simple and easy game so they can have fun. They don't want to have to be taxed with a lot of mental exertion. They're not going to school, they're trying to play a game, and I get that. But sometimes the obsession of constantly watering down, shortcutting, fast forwarding, and simplifying actually it has the op,
Confusion.
the opposite effect of intention. And you may just want to play it out. So he was talking about uh, role playing out, running into some sort of obstacle. I'd almost be better off playing it. I don't want to play his stuff on my channel. That would be untoward and possibly a copyright violation. But I hate having to synopsize.
Paraphrase. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because you feel like you're not giving the guy the benefit of explaining himself. But basically, what he was saying was that do you want to role play out running into obstacles when you walk through a hex or not? I say yes. He talked about using procedural rules that somehow, if you roll badly, your party becomes lost or off course, and it forces you to take a random direction that's determined through die roll. And that's something that's used in some of the original D&D rules. And I haven't said to him, but I made a video about it, and I said, just let them. What's this term that everybody's starting to use now? Let them cook. Let the players map it out, and quit trying to evade the detail when you're trying to. His argument was sometimes you don't need to be super immersive or super detailed. Maybe not. But I'm saying if you maintain that immersion, just like we were talking with the combat, instead of saying you rolled an 8 on your +2 sword or whatever, maintain the immersion and say Rabelar, the great warrior, you know, heaved his massive battle axe and buried it in the skull of the vile orc enemy, and you know that gets people riled up. They love that shit. You know, they want to hear a story. It pulls them away when
Want
you
to
have
be the story.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the thing that, yeah, for anyone who loves a good story and loves to read a good story, role playing games are the next iteration of that, where you get to be the story.
Right. So, and when you jump into, well, let's abstract that. So let's see, and they start getting into some procedure to get around it. You're not really helping things. And then there was well, let's just skip it all together and fast forward. Well, then all of a sudden you're starting to have a story that doesn't have a linear progression, and it starts to get difficult to understand what's happening or remember what had happened just prior because you've chopped it up or deleted it out. It's like having a movie where it was over edited to the point where the plot is lost because they pulled out too many scenes to that were developing the plot. So this has happened with me from time to time where let's just fast forward, and then you come back next session, and you go, what the hell even happened? So as the video progresses, he mentions to himself or to the audience, he says, "It turns out that I had overlooked the fact that my party had already been in the area that we were discussing as far as hex crawl, and we kind of really didn't need it. So mistakes happen. I know I've made them. I biffed my last session, but good. But that's why if you just let things play out in a linear time progression, if you let things play out role playing wise and in a hex crawl, let those people make their own map. You won't need a chart to arbitrarily inflict being lost on people.
Oh, I can get lost in my own house, but which, one thing I will say that you could do, I don't know, this may be out of, but the first thing comes to my mind is if you get lost, um, and maybe I'm getting this from a childhood memory of Candyland. You're stuck in the molasses swamp for a couple terms. You're not getting out until until you find your way out, and that could be represented by just taking time. And if you had a time sensitive mission, well, you could lose the whole mission based on that. So, but I don't know if that's sorry.
No,
That's too
you're right.
simplistic, right?
You're right. You're right. But here's the thing. That's the abstraction. And
Yes,
here's
that
my
is the abstraction. Yeah.
and here's my case against it, because it may not be in Candyland. It's just bad luck you landed on the molasses swamp, or you drew the card that sent you there, something like that. But
Yeah, I always did.
right, and whereas if you were a Boy Scout or something and you went out and did your map badge stuff, and I've heard hilarious stories about guys who messed up and got lost, and it can be its own adventure. It can be its own, it can be fun in and of itself. If you let them really get lost, instead of going, well, we're just going to pretend and say it happened, and now you have this arbitrary penalty that may cost you the game, then and I know some people like that because then you can say, well, it was just bad luck. I just had a bad roll. Otherwise, I would have won the game. But I guarantee you, getting lost can be its own adventure. So if you let them map it all out, but you have to be a good DM in that you have to be very descriptive and be very immersive. You know, indicate where the sun is if it's shining. You have to have weather, because that can cause drama and friction, and drama and friction is and overcoming it gives the players a sense of accomplishment. But if they're oh yeah, okay, this guy's gonna make me map, and they kind of half-ass it because they think it's boring, or they're not into it, or I don't know how to make a map or something. When it comes time to have to reference that map and it's not made properly, they might find themselves being lost. Now, he said his people would find that unfair. I don't understand really why. If your own machinations, because that's what would happen if you don't know how to read a map, or your map is bad, you'll get lost. So I just see it as a natural way to role play something out instead of burdening players and or DMs with more procedural rules to kind of abstractly account for it. I mean, if you don't like the prospect of getting lost because it becomes complex, then just take it out of the game. But like we said earlier, if you try to middle ground it, sometimes you just make a big mess. And and during the rest of the video, he says there's other ways you can do it. People start saying, well, there's different ways you can do it. And it's not that their ideas are bad. Magenta had one and stuff like that. It's that you have to start spitballing how to compensate and how to correct. Whereas if you just played it out and stopped saying, well, that's too complicated, or it takes too much time, or we need an abstraction, just let them map it out. Let them role play going through the forest. And magically, without any effort or need to write things out, things will start to happen. Um, and I can't emphasize that enough. But most people go, oh no, too complicated. It would take too much time, and they want to gloss over it. But you're glossing over something that could be pretty interesting, and it's easier.
And I just want to remind everyone that not all who wander are lost.
Well, there you go. There you
Yeah.
go. So that was one of his this fella. I'm looking forward to being given the opportunity. but I don't want anybody to think that I'm assuming I'm going to get one. This guy doesn't know who I am, and uh, and I don't want to spend too much time highlighting his stuff because I don't want there to be any friction, you know, poaching information or anything like that. But the other thing is, I spent some time thinking about what can I do for me and Magenta did. What kind of topics can we come up with, and then look around and see what other people are doing, so we don't seem like copycats. There's you name it. You name anything about these games, war games, RPGs, whatever, that, oh, I want to learn about or I want to hear about this. Somebody else has done it somewhere. And then somebody else has done that again. You won't find just one video on any topic. So, has everything been said? No. I think everything's been said by one particular person, but you might want to hear different views. So, uh, I want to discuss with this guy. Daniel is his name. I shouldn't just keep referring to this guy. That sounds impersonal and rude. But Daniel is talking about. But I don't want to seem like I'm trying to ride off of coattails of a larger account either. Does that make any sense? I'm trying to be,
Well, it does,
you
but
know,
this is the kind of thing I think it's natural when you're talking about a subject and you have a common interest, and someone brings something up and it sparks an idea in yourself, and I can see why it becomes something that you want to discuss and reference the other person's point of view because that's what sparked your idea in the first place. I don't
right,
think it's the same thing as writing quote tales or taking content from someone or anything like that. I think it's just the natural progression of interacting with other people in the same genre who have different ideas. And sometimes you agree wholeheartedly 100%, sometimes you agree 70%, and sometimes you disagree.
right.
So it's all valid. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of cool about the games too, is especially if you're playing with the dungeon master and the game master concept, which the first time I ever heard about it, and I'm sure this is not true, that it's, I know it goes back farther because we did that episode on Kriegspiel, but the first time I ever heard about it was in the context of Dungeons and Dragons. um, and but the idea of that means that you can have that each game can be as different as the game master or dungeon master who's running, and that's kind of what's cool about it. Does that mean that you're going to have an inconsistent experience? Well, maybe, until you find the dungeon master that's just right for you, or what whatever comes along from that. Sometimes you might have a experience with the dungeon master you might not think is going to be the right dungeon master for you, but then you end up having the most fun in that game that you ever had. So it's kind of a that's kind of the fun of finding out how these games are going to run, is doing that. And you know
Hmm.
they can
Hmm.
be so individualistic, and that's what makes them interesting to me, because it's not the same.
The final kind of subject I wanted to talk about or segment was uh, creating campaigns and the prehistory of the history. So if you're into older D&D, or you're just such a D&D fan that you find, how it all started, an interesting tale. We've been treated to a well researched documentary with a literary companion piece in The Secrets of Blackmore. And more recently, Rob Kuntz, one of the uh, original D&D developers and players with Gary and the crowd, um, he's been around, but he seems to have just kind of emerged from hibernation and 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 really become active on social media and doing the rounds with interviews and such. And we've talked about the interview previously in this episode, and I've talked about it extensively elsewhere on the channel. Um, but there's a history beyond that, before that, you know. And I just thought it'd be interesting to see some of that and talk about the war games that led to the RPG. Because I'm telling you, there's people that get somewhat adamant, some who get almost vicious about the fact that there's an extreme difference, and there isn't. There's a lot of similarities, and uh, they took a split, the family tree, as it were, of gaming had a fork, but it really, you know, want to see those two lanes meld back into the same highway as it was in the past. So, uh, and in the realm of campaign creation and custom campaigns and custom worlds like those that are made in RPGs, some people say that's the difference between wargaming, but they're only looking at historical wargaming. They're not really thinking through the whole thing. Here's the thing: a lot of people aren't. They think they. And it's okay. I'm not. When I say they think, it makes it sound like I'm being some chaco. And you think you know everything, but they think they have a very broad view of everything that has been done as far as products and thoughts, but they haven't looked in certain corners and they're not aware of certain things. I often touted as an example, my encyclopedic knowledge of 8-bit retro video gaming. I thought I had known everything that came out and was aware of all the products. And then I started listening and watching retro gaming content on Twitter and Instagram. And there's been a couple of times where somebody's pulled out a product or something that I had no idea that existed, and I thought I knew about it all. So, um, some people might not be aware of this stuff. So I was going to go to a screen sharing here, and hopefully it'll work. Back to that. Okay, do my little. Okay, you can hear me, Magenta?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so can you see that? See the black and white picture? Making sure that it works here for everybody.
Yeah.
All right, this is Tony Bath. Tony Bath is uh, a author and wargamer, one of the more famous ones. His heyday was early 60s. He has a connection to chainmail and to medieval wargaming that leads into TSR and D&D to a degree. But most of what he did was late 50s, early 60s. He wrote a book called uh, How to Make a War Game Campaign. And a lot of that influenced uh, the wargaming that people like Gary Gygax and Rob did just prior to D&D. And the Kriegspiel war game that we've given a history about in previous episodes is really the foundation, the birthplace of this whole thing, as far as role playing games. So, uh, but he did a Hyboria war game campaign. Are you familiar with Hyboria, Magenta? Do you understand the reference there?
No,
Okay,
never heard of it.
okay. It's Robert Howard was a author um, 30s and 40s, and it's part of his uh, world. It's a fantasy type of world, uh, and he wrote some novels about it. And let's just give you let people who may not have seen. Here's a picture of him right there, and had a cast of characters, including, I'm sure you're familiar with Conan the Barbarian.
Yes.
Okay, so he was one of Conan has a long story where there's been more than one author over the years and stuff like that. But he
Yes.
has a version of Conan that some people feel is, the real Conan. It's not the kind of Conan that somebody who just thinks of Schwarzenegger in that bandana with that giant sword. But anyway, so one of the campaigns that Tony did was to use Howard's imagination in the world that he created as a place to do wargaming campaigns. As the tweet says, it was partly an excuse to mash up ancient armies from different eras and pit them against one another. Um, the note below, other than lauding him, obviously the note is written by a fan, but what the Rule of Thule is referring to is the book How to Make a War Game Campaign, and it has a lot of the timekeeping and monetary rules that you see in Dungeons and Dragons first edition manual, as far as creating a kingdom and things like that. So if you look into Blackmore, you see the history of D&D, and you see the times where they being the players had fortresses or something like that, or uh, their own castles. A lot of that kind of play was founded on Tony Bass campaign type system. Uh,
How did that work in that case? Was it something that the castle was pre-built, like you would just waltz in and it would become your castle, or did you have to build it as a part of your campaign and like choose its construction and details?
it could be either or. There was times where castles were sacked and then occupied by the attackers, taken over and then used by them. In some cases, they were built. Um, I had a long term campaign in the ones you're familiar with, uh, the red box from the early '80s.
Mhm.
The D&D, it was called BECME, Basic Expert. What the C stood for, I forget. I forget everything. Anyway, it was there was a box set for a range of levels, increasing in experience and thus detail. So it was kind of a stepping stone system that walked you from the shallow end of the pool, from basic play, the red box, the most familiar one with the dragon on it, and then walked you all the way out to being maximized into immortals and stuff like that. And inside those volumes, there a kind of truncated version of stuff like that, where you had prices for building a fort or a castle in labor. How many people would take, how much would you have to pay them, how much a ballista would cost to mount on a bastion tower, and how much a drawbridge would cost, and all that stuff. The cost of hiring mercenaries, the cost of upkeeping an army. And the idea being is that if your character advances and really starts to gain a lot of wealth, that they might uh, become some ruler of a principality, or be able to buy their own fort and hire their own army, and become a political and military force in the world, as opposed to just uh, a character seeking fortune by slaying dragons or killing orcs or something like that. So so there was rules for that, which were just guidelines about how much it would cost, and what kind of time it would take to build your own facilities or take them over through military force. Yeah. So does that answer your question? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was pretty much what I was asking you.
So that's what they do with D&D, and first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons has their version, which is largely based off of things like the ideas of Tony Bath and things like that. And then there's the Beckme is, as I say, kind of a truncated version, because that was uh, the version that was kind of mainstreamed and meant to sell to the masses in places like Toys R Us or uh, KB Toys and stuff. Fictitious realms, and he made up a world where there was several countries, and some of them were uh, at at odds with one another. And he made maps of these countries. He made uh, culture, government, economy, even language of these places, and had them illustrated as well. I don't know if he did his own illustrations or not. I never even paid any attention to know, but they were illustrated. So that sounds exactly like a campaign setting for RPG. That's what you do when you make a campaign setting for RPG. But he was doing it for war games, and they were fictional
Don't you think
places.
he probably time traveled and stole that from D&D?
There you go. That's right, because
Right.
he's got because they're right, yeah. So right,
Just
good one.
kidding. We know
But
he invented the time travel.
but these kinds of things, that kind of fictional world, was created by a lot of war gamers. It has a term called imaginations. IMAGI dash nations. Clever little play on the word. And they're
I
fictitious
like it.
places. Yes. And they have their own military traditions, their own military organizations, their own military colors, their own flags, their own governments. They all have that, just like Greyhawk does. Um, so there you have another piece of role playing that existed far before role playing became the worldwide thing that you're saying it is. There's another chunk. There's another piece where they were influenced, and they took something that existed and went elsewhere with it.
But you
Um,
know what they had that none of those others had?
what?
TV ads.
Yeah, I'm not arguing. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
and
no,
that's
I mean that's the difference. I think that
I
kind of
agree.
made the difference there.
Sure,
Television ads and big box retailers.
right.
But I still I get what you're saying, and you're right. And this history, I think it's important to speak about it and to go back. Especially, I've always been a big fan of H.G. Wells. Anyway, with his writing, I've always liked his stuff too. So I think it's good to recognize the contributions of all of these people along the ways that got us to the kind of gaming that we all enjoy. So it's
Yeah,
valid to bring all of that up. I do think though that it was a revolution when D&D came out too. It really did pick it up a notch um, in a way that nobody else had managed to do before, not for lack of trying or for contributions, but um, the success really came about with D&D.
Um, yeah. So, but the imaginations, uh, you saw that most of the building blocks already existed. Here's an example, here's another example of something I'm trying to say. Um, it's not necessary. I don't want to go. Too many anecdotes make people yawn. Oh, it's just an old man telling old stories, so I'll pass on that. But imaginations are a really neat deal. Um, some people in wargaming don't like them for a variety of weird reasons. Just like, you know, I don't really, I never really used them very much because I was an avid consumer of military history, real military history, and I wanted to delve into that. Um, but imaginations, uh, and not all. Here's another thing: not all of them were war game related. There was a second book that H.G. Wells made. He made Little Wars, and then he made a second one called Floor Games. And the Floor Games book carries on his souring on wargaming to a degree after some of the battles of the First World
Actual
War.
war after
Yeah,
an
after
actual
after
world war. Yeah,
witnessing the
I
first.
can see
Yeah,
that.
so he moved on, and he had he started talking about fantasy places that were filled with dinosaurs and magical temples and kind of you can almost see him cogitating on uh, time travel in the games that were or some of the games that were featured in floor games, some of the ideas and some of the worlds. There was these lost islands filled with untamed uh, people that had very ancient, almost like Aztecs. A real land in a lost vibe, and you weren't going there as an army to conquer it. You were going there as a group of people, like King Kong, not the original because I don't remember all the details of the original, but the one that was done in the '70s with
Oh yeah,
Jessica
where
Jessica Lange.
you were an explorer going to discover, but you weren't going to conquer. You were just going to
Right,
um,
yeah,
safari kind of thing,
right.
which
It was more like a party of adventurers than a military exercise, and
yes, that brings up a topic I think we should
kind of more
discuss.
like
And
D and
then,
D,
right,
where you have a party of explorers, and there wasn't really combat that as much as it was about exploration and stuff like that. But it you just saw it was interesting because I think you saw hints of his story about the time machine in his imagination in creating those worlds, and it was a
which is
very very D&D like vibe,
yeah,
at least in
and that's something.
it's a basic premise at least.
Yep, that's something that it brings up a topic I'd love to hear us discuss one time. If I could make a suggestion for a topic for another episode, and that is the role that, or maybe the blurring of the lines between being a writer and being a dungeon master, a game master, and how much of it's kind of cooperative storytelling to an extent, and it would be interesting to me to see if any of the campaigns and any groups that have been playing for a long time that have been doing any gaming, role playing gaming, ever come out with a book based on the adventures or stories that, I mean, it's not that much of a difference in writing a great story for people to live an immersive kind of experience through. and writing a story for people to read in their, off time, except that you're more interactive with it. And it's kind of almost more challenging in a way. As an author, you can control the whole narrative, including what the characters do. But if you're a dungeon master, a game master, that character agency changes things. You know what I mean? That they can do unpredictable stuff that you have to adapt to.
Right. And I promoting everybody else on my site when I need promotion more than they do seems like a bad idea, but I will reference somebody that I know just tenuous, that we're acquaintance, not friends or anything like that. I've never met the man personally, but he goes by Mage's Musings on YouTube. He's a Canadian fellow, very sharp guy. Um, and he runs campaigns, or a campaign, or perhaps more than one. I'm not even sure, but I know this, that I go and check his channel from time to time, and he takes what occurs in his games and then uh, reports them or turns them into stories. The last one I saw was a kind of almost comic book like artwork where he was playing out the game that he had just played with his players. It was like a story, and so you were watching the game by watching the story, if that makes any sense.
Makes
So
sense.
so to answer your question, there are people who take a, and I've heard of other people that said they were working on a probably haven't seen the project, but they said they were doing this, where they take a campaign log, much like you take the notes for your party when we play Star Wars, and they take that log, um, and they convert it into a short story or even a kind of novelette type of thing that tells the story of the campaign in a narrative format. So yes, people um, have done that, or at least are working on doing that, or have projects like that. And it springboards me into the next thing I wanted to cover. Uh, Another example of what you're talking about, sort of, is there was a I've never played it, but there was a RPG called Mutant Chronicles in the early '90s, and about 10 years later, uh, a movie was made about the RPG, a feature
Mm.
film, and it had some pretty. It had Malkovich was one of the guys in it. So I don't know how well it did commercially as a movie, but it was based off an RPG, not an RPG story, just based off the RPG. So somebody took I kind of like that idea. Hey, I want to make my own campaign or my own story out of this, and they made it a film instead of playing it out. It's interesting. One last one, and then I know you want to say some more stuff, so I don't want to dominate the combination. But one last great example is, and it's a war game, but it still works and it's an example. Hunt for October and Red Storm Rising by Tom Clancy both were influenced, and Red Storm Rising, more than Hunt for October, was a novelization. He added to it, of course, but that was based off of a game that Clancy played with his co-author. His co-author is a man named Larry Bond. I've met Larry Bond. I've played war games with him. Larry Bond was a or is a an author, retired naval officer. He was instrumental in the Navy's portion of the aerial campaign over Iraq in 1991, and he has created and uh, been a kind of made a business out of a naval ROTC war game called Harpoon that was
Oh,
created
heard of
instruct
that.
to instruct Annapolis cadets, and it proliferated into a game that has uh, been played as a both a PC game and a miniatures game for decades. And so that novel is basically a novelization of that game being played in campaign form. So yeah, it can be done. I like the idea myself. I don't know that a lot of people. I don't know how many people I've asked around. I said, "Is that something you'd be interested in doing or watching?" And I kind of get a meh. So I don't know if
Well,
there's.
yeah, I think that what I could see it being an inspiration for a novel or something that becomes a product. But at the same time, if you're just watching the playing, I don't know if that's as interesting because there is a lot of that where you do get into at least any role playing game that I've played. Some of the players at some point or another, everybody always talks about their die rolls, and there's a lot of cross chatter, other things that are not related to the story per se. It's really hard. As much as I think we all try when we're playing role playing games, I think people will break the fourth wall pretty regularly, if you know what I mean, and
That's
not
true.
staying a character.
Yeah, that's true, and it's one of the most interesting proposal. It will never work because nobody will universally adopt it. It'll only work if it was universally adopted. But if it was, I think it'd be a great idea. And that idea was a rating system for games, where you went from 1 to 4. One was, I just want to. The game is secondary to meeting up with friends and joking around. We're using the game as a excuse to culminate as a group and chat. We play the game, but we're effing off a lot. And then there's, well, the game is first, but we still are super chill and like to screw around. So we're kind of clowning around as we play the game. And then 3 is, well, we're here mostly for a game. We're not super uptight, but we're amateur players. We're not going to get upset if somebody breaks character for 5 minutes to say something. And then there's the, you're not breaking character. Once you sit down, you better be fully immersive for the entirety of the session. We want adherence to the premise of full immersion and role playing at all times.
And you
And
better hire a coach to get the accent right.
right, so, but yeah,
I would never be able to do that one.
and the reason you would do that is so that when you have pickup games, when you're playing online, because most people, believe it or not, most people have to play online because they don't have a player pool to draw from. You don't waste your time going, hey, I want to play this game, and you get in there and everybody's being less serious than you are about playing the game, and that robs your fun. Or the other way around. You get some guy and this guy wants to be super hardcore and you just want to chill on the mic and party and have some fun. So that way nobody's in the wrong game and have wasted their and everybody else's time because it's not to their preference. They can say, oh, this is rated 4. That's what I want. It's a great idea, but most people would be like, I'm not doing that. I'm not using that rating system for a variety of reasons, so it would never work. But in theory, it's a great idea because you do have that, like you were talking about, people that have a different outlook on things
Mhm.
like that. So, but on the side of the imaginations we were talking about, beyond, I really wasn't trying to get a tug of war about Gary's and D&D's place in things. I know what you're saying. The core, it was it was something that was picked up uh, by the idea that it had a large commercial potential, and investment money was put into that commercial potential, and it was realized through commercials. You didn't. I've never seen a TV commercial for Panzer Blitz. I love the hell out of that game, and a lot of people know what it is, but I don't know that Avalon Hill ever advertised on TV. But I've seen TSR commercials
Oh
more
yeah,
than one. And then they got into merchandise.
and
Mhm.
they also got into controversy, and the controversy helped them in some respects. I mean,
Yes,
I ironically, the people who were screaming about how this it's all demonic or whatever really spread the word about it because people who may not have ever seen the commercials or may not have known anything about the game were suddenly hearing about it. And granted, it's in a bad context like that for being defamed as something that it really wasn't, never was meant to be that way. It's just an exercise of imagination. But people start, talking about it, and it grew into this thing that became discussed in churches all across the country, and on talk shows, things like that. As I remember seeing the 700 Club was a particular fan. I think they did multiple episodes, dragging it through the mud, just to kind of try and keep people away from it. But that just seemed to enhance its popularity even more.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole, I mean, yeah, it did. But okay, so here, in the minds of a lot of people, and I understand what they're saying, and I to an extent agree that its success was its downfall. For a lot of years, it was really slumped after Gary left and all that, and it was taken over. I don't, the company now that owns it claims to be making profit of it, but they also have come out and several times and said, we're not getting enough money for this, and we need to find ways to monetize it better. And it's changed a lot. And if you're somebody who played it in 1979, what's being presented to you now as D&D, what I've tried to talk about throughout today is how things have progressed. You can see a lineage back. Is Tony Bass campaign an RPG? No, but you can see, the ancestry of it when you get to D&D of the original D&D of the 70s, and the next version, which is advanced D&D of the late 70s, early 80s. But once it became mainstreamed and Beck-Me came out, which we were talking about, the box sets, the red and the blue, and they had different colors, the one that you had, which you could buy at a shopping mall. A lot of people said that's it. Once it mainstreams, it changes everything, because you go from people who are looking to advance ideas and creativity to people who are looking to capitalize on potential monetary benefit. And
Right.
I don't want. I kept trying to dodge around talking about D&D specifically, especially the history, because I did say earlier that there's no way you can't be a copycat because everything's being talked about. But right now, the hype is D&D's history. So you're kind of beating a dead horse, and that's why I kind of ducked around it. Um, but for the new folks like yourself that may not have been so fanatic in following every little thing, um, the Satanic Panic stuff really shined through in the company's attitude when they came out with a second edition for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And 2E was scared of the Satanic Panic. The people who were funding the company, which weren't Gary anymore and all that, looked at that press as negative and a potential way to lose a lot of money. They're going to crush us with this shit. So they did everything they could to try to wipe away the symbology. I know that's not really a real word. People are like, that's not a real word, but the symbols of first edition that led some of these very strange individuals. There's nothing strange about being religious. I'm not a bigot. You're welcome to Christianity. But the people who who were ringing the satanic bell. They were charlatans. They were attention seekers. They were kooks. They weren't, you know, um, you may like Robertson and the 700 Club, but he was the closest thing to mainstream that was hitting people with a satanic panic. The rest were sensationalists trying to grab a buck on their own, and that includes Geraldo Rivera and his TV show, because that's all that show ever was. Um, but it scared those people that ran TSR, and they changed it drastically so that they wouldn't hear the screeching of the people that you apparently lived around down in South Carolina and places
Oh,
like that.
believe me, I heard it.
Oh yeah.
I heard
So
it. It
so
was, yeah. Of course,
and
I
what?
heard it even about a black cat that I had.
Well, right.
This
Yeah.
this cat wasn't black to be in anybody's way. He was just that's how he was born, and he was the sweetest cat ever.
Right.
Such
So
a sweet, just a very, very loving,
here.
very, very decent cat. I mean, he was a cat's a cat.
Right.
Their fur
Exactly.
doesn't really matter, but
Exactly. Exactly.
but
So
that wasn't the case there. I clearly was up to no good because I had a black cat. So
now,
go
but
figure.
but that's but what happens is, and this isn't the only franchise where this is. Star Wars and some of these other things, same way. The more you try to bring it to the masses from a group of dedicated individuals, or dedicated group of niche people, the consummate Star Wars geek that was mocked by Jim Shatner on SNL, those people funded that thing. Those people kept that thing going past its cancellation. And when they try to take it from
I'm
them
one of
and
those people too.
right, and turn it into this candy ass version of it so that it's palpable to the masses, it ruins it. And you have a different product, and that's what's happened with
I
D&D.
disagree on Star Trek. Star Trek was never ruined. Still going strong. Don't tell me Star Trek was ruined. Don't you dare. We're gonna come to blows. I'm gonna have to roll some dice on you because that is not allowed. Star
Well,
Trek is
and I
still
try to
the best
yeah,
sci-fi ever made, and
yeah. Well, it gets political, and we came dangerously close to hitting the wall of politics earlier by
yeah, yeah.
remark.
Well,
So
we're
I,
not going to talk about the wall of
but
politics, but
but
as sci-fi goes, Star Trek is still
but but
still strong.
the well, anyway. So uh, we've really diverted off into different directions, and but I did want to. I brought up the Tony Bath thing because uh, imaginations. Uh, Hold on a second. Have I hit the? Oh, go ahead. Go.
All right. So I wanted to circle back to something you said about the imaginations because, first of all, I love the name Imaginations. It's great. But I never heard of them before. And is there somewhere where you can like buy actual games that they produced, or where someone who's interested in more about them could find out a little more about what kind of games they produced? Or
Um, there are some games that have been produced that you can buy, um, but it wasn't really a product, and it was there's no attributing there's no attribution to whom first coined it, but it just kind of became this term that was used somewhere and picked up, and people just kept referring to it. So it's kind of a jargon term. It's not a brand name, and nobody really knows that I'm aware of where it first came from. Um, because people like Wells, like we talked about, came up with it. He didn't specifically use the term imagination, but it was exactly that. Um, the term was in print with Charles Grant probably in the mid 60s, but it had been around before that. So, but yeah, you can. Some people have packaged their ideas and sold them. Uh, the idea is also used by militaries, like the U.S. Army uses the idea, and they're not to maybe the extreme detail, but some detail about the nation itself. And it changes from time to time. During the Cold War, when you trained to fight predominantly either the North Koreans or in some cases, but usually the Soviets in the 80s, 70s, 80s, stuff like that for obvious reasons. There was no reason to hide that or not discuss that, hey, we're going after the Soviets. It's everywhere and it's this huge thing. But
Right.
they got this attitude later that let's not keep pulling out real nations, because what happens is if those nations might get wind of it and they might go, this means they're gearing up for something. They might look at it as some sort of precursor to aggression
Right.
or some sort of diplomatic position as a
Also, would you have to give away some of the secrets that you knew? Like, if you're putting in a Russian tank in your war game to accurately represent it, you would be like telling the Russians, "Hey, we know what your tanks are capable of," and
well,
and here's a game that shows what our tanks are capable of. Um,
well, uh, yeah. I mean, that's something to consider. The the fact of the matter is we all knew already for a variety of reasons. And if you're if in depth, here are a couple of things. I try not to be a salesman, but if a shameless plug opportunity comes up, I'm taking it. And I do have a World War III war game on the way, and on the old Twitter, if you're a Twitter follower, I have in the past, and if am so inclined or requested to in the future, can get into a lot of depth on the Cold Wars. I have a lot of I don't know if education is the right word, but I know uh, exposure to it. But yeah, security could be an issue as well. I suspect. But what they did is they came up with these. They didn't want to offend anybody. They didn't want to think people they were telegraphing that, hey, we got you in our sights. So they came up with these ideas, and they did do imagination in that they had their own names, their own um, governments to some degree. They sometimes you'd have exercises where you fought amongst hired civilian extras in scenarios, and they would be citizens of this country and stuff like that. So very much in its essence, the same as imaginations of the concept in wargaming. Because this was done at places like the National Training Center for the U.S. Army, and that is in and of itself wargaming. It's at the full scale. It's a maneuver with actual tanks and such, but at its heart, it's still just a war game. It's
right.
fucking awesome is what it is. So it's like a giant it's like a giant game of laser tag with government tanks and planes and stuff. It's yeah, war isn't fun, believe me. And everybody who's a veteran, oh yeah, you don't want to only the wannabes, man, that shit ain't real, but it's real fun. It's they always said that Miles at the NTC was the closest thing to reality you got. Go get a taste of reality, and it ain't that close, um, but it was a trip. So anyway, but bottom line is that even to this day, modern militaries and governments will use the concept of imagination for their own purposes. There,
So,
America isn't the only one.
right. So if someone wanted to learn more about that kind of stuff, they would basically be looking for H.G. Wells and his contemporaries. And
Yeah, there's a lot of war game blogs. Der Alte Fritz is a war game blog that is done by a collective group of people, and they discuss it. There's all sorts of things. I will be putting out it in my blog. Uh, Today has been shoot myself in the foot day because I've been promoting everybody but myself. Although I did recently say I don't want to be nothing but a shameless self promoter. That said, I do write, I do have blogs. Feel free to check them out. There is some stuff about Cold Wars, and I will be putting some stuff about imaginations. Now, I rolling back quickly to Tony Bath in the Hyboria campaign, that's a copyrighted novel. Or, well, the world isn't, but there's some novels that Howard wrote and all that sort of stuff. And I use imaginations are typically things that are thought up, imagined imagined by other people. But you can take the same concept of the Hyboria campaign and apply it to IPs, which I have done. These aren't for sale because I can't sell copyrighted. But if you and I want to sit down and play a GI Joe war game with my GI Joe figures in my backyard, I'm not going to get sued. That's not a copyright, you know. So if I make up a little game about Star Wars and play it with my friends, and I'm not distributing or selling it, you know, and that's what I've got is that kind of thing. Um, and I have them for Star Trek, for Star Wars, for a variety. The Mutant Chronicles that I just talked about earlier, I didn't make that one up. A friend of mine did, and he says, "Well, I can't sell it, and I don't give it. You know, it's just a page and a half." So he let me use that as well. But the rest of them I made up. Some of them are historical, and they're um, so they're not really imaginations in that they're not fictional anymore, but they use the same framework, and that's one of the things. It's one thing when we were talking about having different games and not using so many rules and having a variety of campaigns and ways that they're played. This is the same sort of thing. You have a base set of rules that govern, you know, combat and things like that to a degree. And then on top of that is the universe that you're emulating, whether in this case it's a bunch of, you know, Star Wars or something like that. But I just thought they'd be fun to play. They're real basic war games. They're kind of a strategy role playing war game in that there's characters uh, and there's role playing elements to them, but they're sprinkled amongst a universe that typically is at war. You know, whether it be the Star Trek fighting the Romulans or the Klingons or the Cardassians or the Rebels versus the Imperials or something like that, or even if it's historical, you know, I've got Union versus Confederacy, you know, U.S. Civil War, U.S. American Revolution, that sort of thing. But that foundation that is based off of the old imaginations or the old campaigns of Tony Bath can be used as a foundation to put whatever house or whatever building you want on top of it. You've got your own idea, your own world you want to make up that is kind of a conflict related world. You can take this set of rules and build something on top of it. So the ones that I have are not for sale, but they are, you can use them and play with them. And what I'd like to do is have people come to my server and play them with me, and they'll give you a taste of what it's like. Now, um, the set of rules that you use as a sandbox to create your own system, that is the product. The Star Wars and the Star Trek are the demonstrations that can't be monetized or anything like that. What do you think?
Both are fine genres to play role playing games into. But I also like the fantasy role playing too. So, you know, it's
Well, and
all exciting.
right, and I have that. It's the world of Mysteria is part of the old D&D. You know, give you a look at it. And when we were talking earlier about making castles, you know, that part of the conversation,
Yeah.
that is the kind of fantasy war game thing I'm talking about. So you're doing that, yeah. So you will have a fantasy version. There's several of them. Warhammer is one. Warhammer Fantasy, those kinds of things. There's some sci-fi. There's even a horror one that is going into, of fighting demons and devils and stuff like that. But they're all just, and the reason I made so many is because you don't want to paint yourself. Hey, I got a demo. Well, what's the demo? Well, it's Star Trek. I don't like Star Trek. You know, then you got to find. Not only you got to find somebody who's interested in playing the system. Now you have to find somebody who's a Star Trek fan. And
Oh, you found one.
right, I found one, but can you find 5 or 6 that are all willing to play that game? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe find 5 people and you go, oh, Star Trek isn't your thing. How about Star Wars? How about this? How about that? And you have all these different ideas. So plus, I like to play them. I just like to have them around because I love the idea of just maybe getting together with some people online, just playing for the absolute joy of playing a game. But they were created to demonstrate the system. And people who say, well, why didn't you come up with your own stuff? I'm not saying I didn't, but if it's my own stuff, I might be able to put that into some sort of product at some point also. So I am trying to sell products. I am not going to spend every minute of every stream that we talk about trying to sell them to you, but in this case, it does come up as something more. By the way, so um, so instead, I did stuff that can't be monetized, but would be a great way to show how the system works.
I created a game,
Yeah, cool. Tell us all about it.
Zombie
Sh-
Killer Snowman.
oh yeah, that's right. That one I do know about. I thought you meant one beyond that. That there is that. Yes, we do have that.
Zombie Killer Snowman. It's really cool.
Go ahead and tell them the premise. Explain the
Okay,
whole thing.
so all right, this is a so the premise of the game is there is a prison, and in within this prison there is experimentation is going on, and this experimentation, of course, as is inevitable in any futuristic scientific experiment, it leads to zombies, of course. And these zombies start getting loose and attacking the guards. And so then the guards, they're fighting back, but in ensuing in the calamity, it ends up being a fire in the prison. And so when this fire happens, all of these zombies that have been created are incinerated. And the ashes are spewed into the air from the furnaces of the prison as they're trying to get rid of these zombies and keep them under control and keep them from getting out into the surrounding populace. Meanwhile, just a little bit downwind is a school that's having a snowman building contest. And this is a contest to challenge children's creativity. They're building snowmen out of recycling things that they find in their local area. So some of them have rakes for arms, and they might have, a chainsaw parts or all kinds of things that are being used to make these snowmen creative. And by some magical creative kind of thing, and we don't really know, but it's some kind of who knows. These snowmen, the ashes of the zombies fall on the snowman, which then melts with the snowman, and they become zombie snowmen. The only way to kill these zombie snowmen is to melt them, basically. That's the only way to get rid of them. If you chop them up, if you destroy them or whatever, they just reform into snowmen again because they're made of snow. So you have to melt them. That's the only way to get rid of them. So your go-to weapons are going to be flamethrowers, hair dryers, that kind of
So
family fireplace,
right,
jacuzzis.
right. Um, so do you want to tell them, or should I tell them the inspiration, where the inspiration for this comes from?
Go ahead, you tell them.
So there's a one, the kind of movie that's so bad it's good, like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, like B grade kind of. There's a B grade horror trilogy called The Ginger Dead Man. Now, we went to one of the last trips I ever took to Blockbuster before they folded. Was we went to a Blockbuster, and I just wanted to watch. It was Halloween, and I wanted to get in the spirit, and I wanted to watch some Halloween stuff. And just like every other trip I've ever made to Blockbuster, I, I couldn't come up with anything. I couldn't think of anything. I had a bunch of ideas when I got, you know what I'm talking about? You go to the Blockbuster, I got a bunch of ideas of what I want, and then you get there and they all fall. Hey, start reading. We spent hours reading stuff when they were, but I picked this thing up. I go, just to, and I can't do it justice. I wish I could go find it.
Oh,
All,
would you
all,
like me to tell the premise of the story, The Ginger Dead Man?
well, you can get the premise, but the blurb that they wrote on the back of the thing, the way they wrote it, and when I
Oh,
picked it up, I thought I was just maybe getting just a low budget horror film. Didn't realize that it was a comic parody. We were practically on our knees. We were laughing so hard reading this thing. But yeah, go ahead. Tell them the basic premise of it. Yeah.
so basically, The Ginger Dead Man is the story of a man who was a serial killer, and he was caught and captured and convicted by the testimony of his arch nemesis, and her name was Sarah Lee. And his mother uh, does a creates a magical spell and turns him into, he's executed, of course, and she gets some of his ashes and she makes a gingerbread recipe. And Sarah Lee is, of course, a baker, and her arch rival is a man who owns the bakery across the street, and his name is Jimmy Dean. And he wants to take over her bakery so he can make sausage biscuits or something. Anyway, it's this crazy thing. So he comes back as this gingerbread man cookie who's about 11 inches high and is running around with this great big knife trying to kill Sarah Lee.
Right. It was just
The
uh
way it was written was just, I mean, I'm reading this and I'm like, are they serious? We're just laughing so hard. But we had to, of course, get the movie and watch it, and it was as bad as you would think it would be. Because
mhm.
Gary Busey, I mean, the Ginger Dead Man, the cookie, looked like Gary Busey through the whole thing. And there's one point where he actually runs over one of the other characters. He uh, he runs him over with the car. He's an 11-inch high gingerbread cookie, but he kills this guy with the great big old hoopty car. It just runs right into the wall and just, I don't know. It was crazy.
Yeah. And we have there's three of them, and we've only seen the one, but each oh god. Anyway, so that was part of it. The other part of it was that there was we went to a small convention in Virginia at was that Madison College,
Yeah, James
Jeff or
Madison. Oh,
James Madison College, and uh, Steve Jackson Games was there, and they were demoing some prototype stuff, and one was a teddy bear zombie game, and you had it was a card game, as you know, one of Steve Jackson makes a lot of those, as you know, if you're a Steve Jackson fan, and it had you had to put together a storyline based on three overused zombie tropes. The being stuck in some large facility with a group of strangers, finding a way to
like the
break out,
mall or
like the mall or a school gymnasium or something like that. Yeah, and then finding a way to break out, and then what was the third one, like escaping to an isolated island or something like that.
Island, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and um, they had all the tropes about what how to do it. Here's the chainsaw, the shotgun for the weapons, the bulldozer or the armored bus. All the it was pulled from all these different movies and stuff. It was a great premise, and it was kind of a fun little game. But I don't. I've looked for it. I've never seen it. Uh, I don't think. Obviously, it didn't make it past development for some reason or another. But we kind of borrowed from that to some degree with the different. We wanted to have different types of
zombie killer
weapons, and
snowmen. Yeah,
yeah, it was a
but
big game.
the thing is with the zombie killer snowmen, they were created by the kids already, so they already come with their assembled parts. But you still have just the one way to kill them, which is to melt them. That's what you got to do.
There's all sorts of, but there's the people of the community who fight, but wasn't there? We had the government sends in some team, and they had all sorts of fancy ways of like grenades that were heat grenades or all sorts of stuff. So there was a variety of weapons that you could upgrade with enough points, and there's even a I see it was, but it's not really dead per se. We've got it written out. We The thing is, we wanted to make it a miniatures game, but miniatures are are expensive to
Expensive to
make.
make. Yeah,
Yeah, so there
3D
was,
printing might be the only way to go with that. But yeah,
and well, even that it's got it's pitfalls and all that, and it's so
I wanted to make it into a movie starring Vin Diesel, but that was just me.
so
Because I had this one liner in there too for Vin Diesel, like when he goes out and it's like they're getting ready to fight, and one of the other character goes, "So you got a hair dryer?"
the thing was is that I well, I don't know. Maybe we should put it on Kickstarter.
I don't know. That would be a cool movie,
I
especially
don't
if Vin Diesel was in it. But yeah,
know, a movie or a
anyway.
game or whatever. Anyway, but that was, yeah.
Mhm.
So that was one idea. Um, Other
He's
things,
not a B movie. He's not a B movie star though. He's really way above that. But
right, right. Yeah, you don't really see him in that kind of stuff, but maybe he's got. I think he's got a good sense of. He's a D&D fanatic. I
there you
didn't
go.
know. I didn't know this, but somebody put out a 2 minute interview, a section of an interview that was about 2.5 minutes, where he discussed how he played D&D as a kid and how that helped him be a better actor and how much fun it is and all that sort of stuff. Um,
Awesome.
it's a fairly old, yeah, it's really neat. It's fairly old. I guess it's when he first started, and he makes an interesting comment at the end where he says, I don't know how well. He said we were playing this before PC, and he's as old as I. He's the same age as I am, so I kind of go, well, brother, they were around, but they were rare, and they were, but he says, I don't know how D&D would translate into the digital age, which is funny because now they're digitizing. Did you know they're digitizing D&D? The next thing is going to be is going to be online. It isn't going to be a. They're moving D&D
Oh,
away.
like they're
Yeah.
gonna Lotro it, like Lord of the Rings online,
Well,
MMORPG kind of thing.
well, they do have an MMO. Uh,
Yeah, because I thought they did. It's by the same company that does the Lotro, the Standing Stones game.
right. But what they're making their own VTT, and what they're going to do is they're just going to have this kind of digital VTT hybrid thing where you have to buy the products, the books and all that stuff online. Yeah, so basically I think where it's going to go is it's going to become a turn-based MMO, and it's going to have all the pitfalls of MMO where you're going to have the microtransactions and all that sort of stuff. is where it's going
Oh,
to
I
go.
hope not, because I honestly think that the individual creativity of it is what is its strength. And if they get rid of that and make it cookie cutter, as much as I actually do love playing Lord of the Rings online. It's one of my favorite games of all times, and I will play it um, probably for years to come as long as it's still available. But it is not the same as, I mean, it's very repetitive. The missions that you go on, you get used to them, and I mean the monsters may change shape and they get more powerful, but your actions that you take to kill them are always the same.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of, you know, I play for the, I mean, there is some cool aspects of the game that keep me coming back, but it is not the same kind of, it's, I wouldn't say it's worse. It's just different. I play D&D, or I play role playing games, all of those things for community, for experiencing the creative side of it, for all of that unpredictability, something new every time. You never know what you're going to get because it's very human. Um,
Mhm.
Computer games are just, they're click fests. They're, when I want to zone out and not think of anything at all, it's more of a solitary thing, if that makes sense. Even though I can sometimes play, with somebody else, it's still more of a I, robotic almost kind of action that you're doing. It becomes it's not the same as an interaction where you're really getting in depth with another person, telling a story with somebody else, or solving a problem as a team with a group.
Right, right. But one of my followers had put a response to it, and I've made a video about the same thing. I'll say that a lot because I make a lot of videos. But anyway,
Mhm.
uh, it's true that the people. Here's the thing: they have they run these companies through marketing, uh, consultation, and from uh, the accountant's standpoint. They don't creativity isn't done for creativity. They all they want to do is, well, our target demographic is 18 to 24, and you know, calling old white men racist is really hot right now. Everybody's doing it, so we'll call the old white men that made this game racist in our book, and it might jack up our sales 14%. And then the accountants go, yeah, this is with a profit. Then you can take that profit projection to the shareholders, and they're happy, and you get, it's all that's the thought process on the thing. It's a machine, and they look at their prospective demographic for the next 10 years, and they look at a guy like me and say, this might, he might not be around the next 10 years, but these people will be around for the next 20 or 30 years. Where are they going? What do they want? And they want this stuff that I think sucks. They're perpetually online. They have generally, this is what this individual was saying. And I agree because I said some of the same things, but it, you know, but he says they're perpetually online. They're not one for print products or something like that. They tend to be environmentally conscious also, so they don't want a product that comes from chopped down trees. So they're going to digitize the thing. They're going to put it online because that's where the eyes and the wallets of the people that are going to fund that IP and that company for the next 10 to 20 years will be. It makes absolute sense from their perspective to do what they're doing. And but guys like me, but they don't care because I probably wasn't going to buy it anyway because I'm talking about, I'm enamored with having conversations with Rob Kuntz about things that happened in 1973. I don't I'm not going to I have a book that was printed in 1979 that's first edition, and I think this is all I need. And I've thought that for a couple of decades, and they know that. When I say they don't know me, but I'm that demographic, and my peers are typically of the same attitude, and they realize that through research and stuff like that. So that's why they take the directions they do. There's some people that are, and they're yelling at these guys, but I don't think they realize that this stuff is all pre-planned, and they're only out for the almighty dollar. Gary and Rob weren't out for the almighty dollar. What happened is he talked about this too. He says, "Were we making products? Sure. They're just like me. I'm not making any bones about it. Yeah, I want to sell you something, but the idea that it was going to become, you know, something to the effect that I don't remember the numbers, but they printed like 10% of what ended up being the demand for one of the original D&D products. And when they saw that, when they saw 10 times the demand versus the production, they being the investors or whoever, that's when they saw, hey man, this can be a cash cow. And they jumped in, and Rob says, we need to borrow money to meet the demands, to print that stuff up and all that. And that's where it became a corporate entity. And all of a sudden they went from people who were enjoying games and just developing some to make some money, to all of a sudden we have this enterprise, and we have to captain this giant ship. And that changed everything. That's why we're kind of going back to something we talked about in 45 minutes ago or whatever, but I was trying to stay away from it. But that's why they're doing digitization on that stuff. So, and
Mhm.
the difference between me and most of the people, just swinging away from, people get really mad about the D&D thing, and I try to stay. I want to. Controversy is one thing, but right now everybody's talking about the history of D&D and this development, and so I'm trying to. But I I always use VTT. It wasn't VTT. I got balled out by some super grouchy, um, toxic fellow about calling it VTT. It's not VTT unless it's a software that helps facilitate the game by using pogs on a map, according to this guy. But I use computer assist, and that's what we always called it in the war game era, was a computer assist. The minute I got a Tandy 600 laptop, one of the first laptops, I put that sucker right next to my war game table and my RPG table, so that I could use it to do some of the math and do some of the record keeping that was kind of tedious to do, like character sheets. I love having digital assistants, but some of the people of my age are like, nah, I want pieces of paper and pencil. At least they say that publicly. I don't know. So
Well, I've run into a lot of folks. I mean, it's kind of 50-50, folks of our age group. Because I'm, of the same age group as you are, and I can say that I was always into technology. I was an early adopter, or whatever they call it now these days, but that was something that I always wanted to, learn that kind of stuff. Um, and there was a lot of people around me who just weren't. They didn't want anything to do with it because it was, quote, nerdy. And so that was not their thing. Now it's become mainstream, and they're all behind. And now I hear it because I work in tech support. So I hear it sometimes. I hear echoes of resentment from people who are like, I'll talk to them about their cell phones, and they'll be like, I don't do all that internet stuff. Like it's a dirty thing to do, like, oh, I don't do that stuff. Yeah. But I also hear people who are I talk to people who are in their 70s who are like really adept at using technologies. So it really just depends. But the farther back you go, the less likely people are to have a fondness for technology and using it in any context, not just wargaming or role playing games.
well, I think it's with the people that follow me on Twitter, and I wonder if it isn't just a banner that they try to rally around and it's a front, because you can't really get away from it. This guy didn't follow me or anything like that, but I had one guy say to me, he says, I said, you want to play a game? Well, he goes, yeah, but I don't live near you. And I go, well, we can play remote. This right here. We could be playing our, you know, we're not in the same room. We could be doing a role playing game right now. Um, and I says, you can use something like this to do role playing. He says, well, I don't want to do that. I don't like that. I don't like the technology. Oh, he goes, well, here's the thing. I says, I said, all you're doing is just hooking up to have a conversation so that people can see. You don't even have to use the video if you don't want to. It's just a means to be able to talk to each other while you play. If you're not using miniatures and a map anyway, because most people like to do this theater of the mind thing, then really why does it matter? Well, it's too much like work. Oh, yeah, I use Zoom in meetings at work. I don't like to use technology outside of work. Guy's talking to me on Twitter.
Yeah. Well,
Huh?
on that
What the
note,
fuck are you talking about?
speaking of being old, it has gotten late over here in my time zone, so um, I am feeling the urge to sign off here. We've had a pretty long topic. We're coming up on 3 hours now, so I think it's probably time to sign off and say goodnight to all of our wonderful listeners who've been stuck with us this long. Um, thank you
Mm.
guys for sticking around with us. And, as always, please, if you enjoyed the content tonight, please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe and tell a friend.
Yeah, yeah. Check things out. We're at Here's the list. Do the things, as some people say. Please like, subscribe. Better yet, get involved. Look for us to go back to live. We kind of got away from live. We might get back in there, especially if we can get people to uh, participate. There's really no reason to have a live unless you have people to talk to other than ourselves. And that's what we'd love to have. You can come on up and be part of the panel, or you can just, drop some comments in the chat box on the side there. YouTube, Rumble, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram. Always look for Command Post Gaming. That's the name of the accounts. Campaigns and Conquests is the name of the YouTube channel and the show that you're watching right now. And you can find us by searching Campaigns and Conquests or by clicking on the link that I will provide below. And this is the show that is longer and involves Magenta and myself. On the rest of the days of the week, you can be stuck just with me and listen to me give shorter commentary on gaming, gaming hints, gaming tips, and invites to play games. Because as interesting as it is to talk about games, it's 10 times more interesting and fun to actually play them. And our Discord server, which you can find in the same link section, we're playing a couple of games. We have a lot of games waiting to be played. We just need the players. Uh, any night of the week, we can set something up with one of these games should we get enough people to play. Games that are currently going on: Star Wars RPG. There is a play-by-post war game that is being played on top of that for Star Wars. Uh, Love it to death. Won't ever stop playing it. We're also looking for people for Greyhawk. Um, and I'd love to run some demos of my RPG that's called Paracosmic Convergence. Uh, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You can join the Discord and peruse through a whole list of other games, from war games to RPGs. So I think I've covered all the social media and link bases with that. If I forgot one and you can think of it, Magenta, hit me up.
No, I think you did cover all the bases. So just, if you're interested, leave a comment. We do keep an eye on those comments and would be very happy to have some guests on the show. So please do reach out and, reach out on the Discord if you're interested in playing the games. And thank you guys again for your participation and support. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night and happy gaming.
Till next time. See ya.